BitLocker full volume encryption is our next topic, an important technology to protect entire drives against access by the infamous unauthorized personnel in the case of lost or stolen systems. BitLocker comes in more than one flavor. The first flavor encrypts a fixed hard drive and marries it to a specific computer. The startup key that unlocks the drive lives in a trusted platform module or TPM chip on the computer's motherboard and must be present for the drive to be usable. Now, for this system to work, the hard drive needs to have at least two partitions, an unencrypted one to begin the boot process, and the much larger encrypted partition containing Windows and the user's programs and data. Flavor 2 is BitLocker as applied to removable drives. Now, this has come to be known as BitLocker to go. The TPM chip technique clearly won't work with a drive that's designed to be portable between different machines, so BitLocker encrypted USB drives unlock via a password, or perhaps a smart card. Now note that BitLocker is not EFS. Unlike the encrypting file system, BitLocker, at least the hard drive flavor, is machine-specific, whereas EFS is tied to a user account. BitLocker encrypts an entire drive, whereas EFS only encrypts designated files. And BitLocker doesn't depend on certificates, as EFS does. Now you may say, wait a minute, I use EFS and we don't have a public key infrastructure at work. And that may be true, but even if you don't have a certificate authority in your network, EFS still uses certificates, it just uses ones that it creates itself. So, how does BitLocker provide protection for fixed disks? Well, if a nefarious laptop thief tries the usual trick of popping the hard drive out of a laptop and accessing it from a PC, on which the evildoer has admin rights, he won't get anywhere. The drive is locked, and if it doesn't see that startup key in the TPM chip, it won't open up. BitLocker will also lock the drive if it detects a change in the startup environment, such as the BIOS or hardware. So it's a good idea to suspend BitLocker before updating your BIOS, adding RAM, etc. FYI, discarded drives are also locked up tighter than a drum as long as they are discarded or recycled or decommissioned, whatever word you want, separately from the machines in which they were encrypted. BitLocker needs to see a TPM chip, specifically version 1.2 or newer, if it's to operate in its transparent TPM mode. It needs to see an unencrypted partition of 100 megabytes or greater, which is not a worry as Windows 10 builds the necessary partitions in a default install. It needs to see NTFS for the operating system drive. And you need to have Windows 10 Pro, Enterprise, or Education Edition to use Classic BitLocker. Now, the reason I say Classic BitLocker is that on certain hardwares, we'll see Windows 10 will encrypt the drive regardless of the edition of Windows as soon as a user signs on with a Microsoft account. Their term for this behavior is pervasive device encryption. No TPM, no problem. There's a group policy setting, and I'll show it to you, that you can configure to permit a PC to use a USB drive to store the startup key instead of a TPM chip. Now, for that to work, of course, the USB device must be visible to the operating system at startup, which is usually not a problem with today's hardware. This non-TPM mode of BitLocker does omit the validation of the startup environment, so it's not quite as secure as the TPM mode. Now, if you want more security, you can set group policy to have BitLocker require a PIN in addition to the TPM startup key. And by the way, the network unlock feature permits software agents like Configuration Manager to perform an unattended restart as needed, for example, after applying a Windows update, as long as the computer is on the local network. Some of the relatively new features of BitLocker include offloading some of the number crunching to the hard drive if it has EHD capability, providing the option of only encrypting blocks that are in use, which makes the process a lot faster in most cases, setting up encryption in the Windows PE phase of an installation, and that pervasive encryption I just mentioned, which happens on systems supporting Instant Go and TPM 2.0 or newer. Well, let's take a quick look at what BitLocker looks like in the wild. So here's the control panel of a Windows 10 Enterprise laptop, and I can select BitLocker Drive Encryption, and we can see that the drive C has BitLocker turned off. I have the option to turn it on here. Notice the shield icon indicating that this requires admin rights on the local machine. I also have a flash drive, and I can implement BitLocker on that as well. Over here to the left is a link called TPM Administration. This gives me the ability to prepare, initialize the Trusted Platform Module chip on the motherboard. Usually this works well. There are some platforms on which it's necessary to perform this TPM activation and initialization in the BIOS. Also, BitLocker supports TPM version 1.2 and newer, so I'm okay on that score on this machine. To initiate BitLocker encryption of the flash drive, I can just select it and choose to turn BitLocker on. I have to decide how I want to unlock the drive via a password or a smart card. Again, a removable drive needs to be protected by one of these devices. It's not transparent encryption decryption as we have with a fixed drive. So I'll choose a password. And now I'm prompted as to how I want to back up that recovery key, which I'll need if anything ever goes haywire. I can save it to the cloud to my Microsoft account. I can save it to a file, or I could print it out. And you can do multiple save operations here. I could pick all three if I wanted. I'll choose to save it to a file. Now I get to choose whether I want to encrypt used space only or the entire drive. It's much faster typically to encrypt only the used space. This is a fairly new option in BitLocker. And we'll click Start Encrypting. And that didn't take long at all. And now I can close out and I can take a look at the drive. Notice the padlock icon next to it. And when I remove the flash drive and then reinsert it, I'm prompted that it's BitLocker protected. And if I want to unlock it, I can click the notification and enter in the password. If I enter an incorrect password, I can click More Options and I can enter the recovery key. And now notice that the drive's padlock is unlocked and I can double click it and gain access to the drive.